I asked him the question that everyone probably would ask when living with a terminal illness, whether that's cancer or, like motor neuron disease, how long have I got?
Mm.
And that's when my wife broke down.
Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Dr. Shafer of Talks with Dr. Shafer. I'm a physician, mom, life coach, musician, author, publisher, and I'm passionate about using storytelling as a tool to help you reclaim your story and build your most beautiful future. Today, I am so fortunate to be joined by a special guest, James Smith. James is a married father of 3 who is living with motor neuron disease, and through the challenges of motor neuron disease has become a wonderful advocate and speaker for the community that copes with motor neuron disease and ALS, from fellow patients to their loved ones. James has been doing incredible work. He has spoken this year for the Parliament and has been advocating for funds and access to research as well as to medications for patients who are coping with ALS or motor neuron disease. And he has also spent his precious time not only being a stay-at-home father to his 3 beautiful children, but also creating his own podcast, Diagnosed Dad, where he reaches out to the community coping with ALS or motor neuron disease to help educate them, as well as connect them with resources and experts. He also created an incredible online Facebook community called MND and Beyond. And today I'm just so excited to have James here and to give him an opportunity to share his story, as well as inform us how we can all help patients and families who are coping with motor neuron disease. James, thank you so much for being here.
What an intro. Thank you so much. Nice to be here, and thank you for having me.
Oh, I am so excited to have you here. I was just so thrilled to have met you. I want to share briefly how we met, our little meet cute. So we were in a Facebook group for podcasters because, again, we're both podcasters, and I was really wanting to upgrade my camera, and you were the first person to comment and give me some advice. And then I looked into your podcast to see, okay, how does his camera look? And then I was just so excited to come across your mission, which, of course, as a neurologist, as someone who has been in clinic with people who and their loved ones who are coping with motor neuron disease, I was just so inspired by the work you do and immediately shared it with every neurologist I know on all of my Facebook groups, because I was just so inspired by not only you as a person, but what you are doing to help support other people who are on this journey with you.
Thank you very much. Very nice of you to say.
No, very wonderful the work you're doing. So now you were diagnosed, as I understand it, in June 2021
Yeah,
after having gone through symptoms that were progressing over about 2 years' time. Can you share that story with us?
sure. Yeah. So it was about 5 years ago now that I experienced my first symptom of, little did I know, would become motor neuron disease. And I remember the day vividly because I was an avid runner. I tried to stay fit. I got the bug of running most nights of the week, and I was ironically running to raise money for a charity here in the UK called the Motor Neuron Disease Association. And one night after I come back from a run, I sat down and did my stretches and had some water and whatnot. And I noticed my left sort of bicep and tricep area was twitching like uncontrollably, almost like an over exaggerated eye twitch that I couldn't stop. And I showed my wife, and she was like, "Oh, that's strange. It must be adrenaline, or it must be fatigue or stress on the body from the run." And I was working full time in the motor trade at the time, so I was doing quite long hours. I was working 5-6 days a week, sometimes 10-12 hours a day. And we just sort of put it down to tiredness and stress on the body. So didn't think anything of it at the time, and didn't have any other symptoms other than the muscle twitching in that arm. And over time, it sort of didn't stop, and it kept on twitching, and it kept on twitching. And it got to the point where I was then noticing my arm feeling heavy. So, and I was using running as a tool to measure that. And I know when you run, you have your arms by your side and you're pumping your arms. And then over time, I could feel my left arm not being able to hold that position for the time that I was running. So I thought, do you know what? It's probably time to go and see a doctor about this. So we rung up my local doctors, got an appointment to see my GP, and they put it down to potentially the running as well, stress on the body, probably nothing. Don't worry about it, but we'll give you a blood test to look out for. I forget the name every time I say this story. I forget the name, and it really annoys me. But there's something called, and I'm going to pronounce it wrong, but it sounds like the supplement creatine.
Your creatine kinase.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, they're checking your CPK levels.
That's the one. So yeah, so they tested for that, and it was slightly elevated in the blood test results, which gave the GP enough information to refer me on to a general neurologist, not necessarily for motor neuron disease, to go and get a second opinion. And that whole sort of time frame felt like it took ages, and I carried on with life as normal, was still working full time, and was still running. And I slowly sort of, in the back of my mind, was thinking, could it be motor neuron disease? Because I'll explain this a little bit later. My grandmother, my nana, as I called her, unfortunately passed away with motor neuron disease herself, probably about 10 years prior to my first symptom. So it was always in the back of my mind thinking it could be in the family. And I sort of carried on with life as normal and waited for my first general neurology appointment, who, as you probably know, did the standard process of physical examination, family history, what my lifestyle's like, and referred me to get a MRI scan and a EMG test, and then had to wait for those results. I think I waited about, I want to say 3 months for those first results, and they all come back fine. So the MRI scan came back with nothing to show. The EMG test come back inconclusive, and it was quite a basic EMG test in comparison to the second one that I will explain shortly, where they just did a standard sort of generalized testing. And it was the day before the whole world went into lockdown that I had my follow-up appointment. And little did we know that that was going to happen, because at the end of that first appointment, the neurologist at the time said, look, I think we need to give it more time. We don't actually know what you have. Have an open mind. We'll liaise in about 3 months' time. And lockdown happened, and I think it was it 8 or 9 months that we were all locked down for, something like that. So I had this in the back of my mind going, what have I got? And I spent months going through Google and trying to find alternative things that it potentially could be. And I come up with loads of things. I think it was called Himalayan something or other. It was like juvenile ALS that I thought it could be, and loads of things. So I was in lockdown. I was made redundant from the job that I was in, and I decided, do you know what? Regardless of what I have, I'm going to do something that I've always wanted to do. And I retrained, and I signed up to a barbering course, and managed to become a fully qualified barber throughout lockdown. And I went straight into cutting hair when we come out of lockdown.
How did that feel, going into that transition?
Amazing.
Yeah.
If whoever's listening, if you're sitting on the fence and thinking to yourself, do you know what? I'll do that next year. I'll wait until that's a New Year's resolution, or I'm scared of doing it. Just do it. Don't let a terminal illness like I've got stop, make you do the things you want to do, because I wish I did it sooner. and it was the best job I've ever had, and had so much satisfaction in actually doing the job that I loved. It, and it sounds corny, it never felt like work. I was going to work, but it didn't feel like work. I never had Monday morning blues, and never, I loved the people I worked with. I was building up a really nice client base. I cut hair for one or two local football players that are down where I live. And I was starting to, slowly but surely make a name for myself in terms of, a decent barber to go to. And I suppose that job gave me a good insight to managing my progression with what I was experiencing. And it got to about sort of 6 months after lockdown that I had to reach out to the neurologist again, because as I was cutting hair, I then experienced the same twitching or fasciculations in my right arm in the same area as my left. And I had noticed that my left arm had got weaker. I couldn't hold my arm up in the position that you need to really, in the way that you should do when cutting someone's hair. So I had to adapt. And I rang the neurologist, and he sort of said, "Look, it doesn't sound good. Let's get you back in for another EMG test." And I then waited for the appointment for that, and had a much more invasive EMG test where they put, I don't need to tell you what one of those are, but they put the needle with the little microphone at the end under my chin, on my tongue, in my back, my legs. They, for some reason, he hit every single nerve in my hand, and it was quite painful, and I would never want to do it again. And then had to wait for those results. And the neurologist at the time, which was just the general one, sent me an appointment letter through to invite me in to share those results on Christmas Eve of 2020. And bearing in mind, I started this journey of investigating what my symptoms were probably in I think it was the sort of spring, summertime of that year. So I'd already been fully into this journey of trying to know what I'm experiencing. And he wanted to tell me the information on Christmas Eve. And I was like, I don't want to know then. So I put it off until about the January, I think, which was the next available appointment. So we were still in sort of semi-lockdown. I couldn't take anyone with me. I was on my own, had to go to the appointment with a mask on. We were all in PPE and everything like that. And he sat down and said, "Look, your results for the second EMG test has come back. It showed enough information." One of the things he said, it showed denerviation. And he said, unfortunately, I'm not going to beat around the bush. He said, "I'll tell you straight, I think you've got motor neuron disease." And I was like, I couldn't really take it in. I was sat on my own with a mask on. He had a mask on. I couldn't read his face. And I left the room in probably the first time I've ever cried in probably 2 decades. Just crying to myself on the way back to the car, thinking, how am I going to tell my wife? What are my kids going to say? And just try to sort of negotiate emotions around what I've just been told. And I was left to my own devices with having to digest what I've just been told, because after he said what he said, he advised that, "I think you've got motor neuron disease, but I'm going to refer you to the motor neuron disease specialist within the hospital." So another neurologist who deals with neurological disorders like yourself, who will give a second opinion. So I then had to wait for this appointment for then. And that took a good 6 months of emailing weekly to try and get in, because I'm now lumbered with this massive weight on my shoulders, thinking, what have I got? Have I even got it? My arm's getting weaker. I'm still doing the job I love. How long can I do that for? Loads of mixed emotions. And we got the second appointment to go and see the MND specialist, and it was a very short and sweet appointment where he did some physical examinations again, looked at my records and said, yeah, I'm sorry to say that I agree with the first neurologist. And I think you're showing signs of motor neuron disease. It is showing a very slow progressive version of it, because up until that point, it would probably have been about almost a year until I saw him from my first symptoms. And he agreed with the first neurologist. And then to then think I was going to get the diagnosis that I was dreading and find the relief to know what I actually did have. He then said, look, I'm not going to diagnose you officially just yet. I think what you need to do is go and see the professor of neurology in one of the main hospitals here in the UK, which was about a 2-hour drive from where I live. And he will give you a third opinion. So I then had to wait for another appointment and wait for that. And at that point, we were now in June 2021. So it was almost 2 years that I went and saw a GP for that first initial blood test. And we went to the hospital with high hopes to think both the doctors or neurologists must be wrong. I'm not showing, the same sort of progression and signs that a lot of people do with motor neuron disease. It must be something else. And I think I was in and out of that appointment within about half an hour. And he said, unfortunately, you have motor neuron disease. And my wife burst into tears. She was pregnant at the time with our third little Rosie. So her emotions were high. And I sort of felt oddly relieved that after all that time, I now knew what I had, and I now could focus on how I can adapt life and move on with it. Because I feel like I'm quite positive. I'm quite open about, it sounds flippant to say, but what will be, will be. I can't do anything about it. Let's move on and try and live the best I can. And he then offered me a blood test to test for all, I think there was 40 known genetic mutations of ALS, motor neuron disease. So I had a blood test, and the reason he offered me that was because my nan, unfortunately, had motor neuron disease. She unfortunately had it for, I think it was 18 months before she passed away. So they thought I had a familial version. So I needed to get tested because obviously we've got 3 children, or we were just about to have our third. And we needed to know if mine was genetic that I could potentially pass down to my children. So I had the diagnosis, I had the blood test, I was given loads of pamphlets and information about how to deal with it, what charities to contact. And I was then referred back to my second MND neurologist, who I now am looked after as and when I need to. And then just waited for the results to see if I had a genetic mutation. And everything seems to come in sort of 3 to 6 months. I don't know why, but about 6 months later, I got my results and they come back negative for all 40 known mutations. So mine wasn't genetic, which was a blessing and a curse, because it was a blessing that I'm potentially less likely to pass it down to my children. But it was a curse because, as you probably know yourself, they are sort of trying to find treatment for more of the familial genetic mutations like SOD1 or CO9 ORF. And I was less likely to probably find a treatment. So as soon as I got all the information and diagnosed and digested it, told all my friends and family, told the place that I worked at, everything just sort of everyone was so supportive, and it was overwhelming of how much support. But what it highlighted to me was how little people knew of the disease. And I've literally just done a video on something similar on the same sort of topic earlier. And I used to get the same sort of comments of, oh, I hope you're all right. oh, you're probably best to get down the gym then, isn't it? To build up that muscle strength. And I was like, it doesn't work like that. It's not, I can't fix the signal that's malfunctioning from the condition. And it highlighted to me of how little people still knew of motor neuron disease. And at that point, Stephen Hawkins was probably the only example you would give someone to know what ALS was. And the other person we have in the UK, we had a couple of rugby players that were well known that put motor neuron disease on the spotlight. And it made me realize that I think I needed to do something and share my journey. And then I started sharing my journey on Instagram, Facebook. I then created a Facebook page called MND and Beyond and built that up to find other people going through the same, situation as I was, and try and find as much support and help other people by raising awareness, because the awareness part was the bit that I struggled to understand, why people didn't understand what the condition was. And people would get it confused with, oh yeah, isn't that what Muhammad Ali had? Or oh, that's what Michael J. Fox has got, isn't it? I'm like, no, it's not. It might sound similar in terms of the symptoms, but no, it's not what I've got. I sort of wish I had that, because I've probably got a longer life expectancy, but it's not like that. And then as soon as you say Stephen Hawkins, you sort of see the world collapsing around them, and they're like, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. Well, all the best. Let me know if I can help. And then it's sort of that sort of conversation, which is fine in itself. But one thing I wanted to bring up just before I started the journey of sharing my sort of symptoms and progression is, when I was diagnosed officially, the professor at Oxford Hospital did say, which was quite nice to hear, and I asked him the question that everyone probably would ask when living with a terminal illness, whether that's cancer or, like motor neuron disease, how long have I got? And that's when my wife broke down. And he said, in my experience, you're showing very, very slow progressive signs of the condition. And when you take the average of 2 to 5 years, people normally, unfortunately, pass away from this condition. I'm already 2 years into the symptoms, and I'm still able to walk. I've got relatively good strength in my right arm and hand because I'm still able to be a barber, and my left arm is getting weaker. So to base myself on the average, I'm sort of not the average. And he said, look, in my experience, I would give you 10 years, if not decades. And in that time, hopefully there will be some sort of treatment or cure to help you either slow down or hopefully help stop the condition. So that was quite nice to know. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to try and utilize my time and help others and spread awareness. And then started sharing my journey on social media, created a podcast as well, where I have a bit more of a longer type of content, because there's only so much you can put on a short 1-2 minute reel on Instagram and things like that. Right. And that's now even sort of expanded, where I'm now incorporating video, and I'm now putting what I'm putting on my podcast as audio only. I'm now putting onto YouTube, which I've felt has actually been a better success than the podcast in terms of engagement and growth. So, and yeah, it's just snowballed from there really. And it's just finding that balance from being a husband to my wife, being a dad to my children, and utilizing my time to live life the best I can while trying to do something meaningful, which makes me feel good and gives me a purpose in life to share my journey and hopefully help someone that is listening or watching. And the feedback that I've had from it has been so overwhelming. It keeps me going, and I've grown sort of the channels to a point where the feedback I get makes me want to keep doing it. And I've even made friends in the process. that are living with motor neuron disease. And that then goes back to the support side of things, because it's not only me trying to do this to help others, it's in some way helping me, because I'm able to, I don't want to sort of vent and express my frustrations with the condition to my wife, because she's living her own life, being a mother, now being, as well as the breadwinner of the family, where I now can't work. She's now earning the money, doing the upkeep of the house, doing the husbandy dad bits that I used to do, like the DIY, putting a curtain pole up or fixing a light switch or painting and decorating. She's now taking on that role as well. So speaking into a camera, I'm now able to help myself, which is almost like free therapy. And that's what I found quite apparent when I started the podcast, because when I'm speaking to myself effectively by sharing certain snippets of my journey, it sort of helps me offload that, so I'm not having to bottle it up and try and deal with it myself. And when I get feedback from people through, my channels like YouTube and Instagram and my podcast, it's nice to know that I'm being heard and helping others.
You clearly are, and it's so beautiful. I just want to highlight how you really have reclaimed that story. There was this period of time where there was so much uncertainty, and then that period of uncertainty to an extent ended because you had a formal diagnosis, but you still didn't know exactly what the future would hold. And you decided that you were going to march forward into that future with certain goals and really take the reins. And I think that is so empowering. And there's so much to be said for telling our story, as you said, almost in a therapeutic sense. And when we feel, that sense of, ooh, this is a little scary, this is vulnerable, instead of backing away from that, leaning into it, because that is telling us that the other person on the other end that we hopefully will connect with, we're going to tap into that side of them too.
Sure.
And really connect with them. And it's so powerful what you're doing with your story.
Thank you so much. It's nice to have feedback like that, because I don't know on the other side of the camera how it's going to come across. And I do feel very, I don't want to say lucky, because I wouldn't wish this condition on anybody. I do feel lucky that the progressive nature of my symptoms are a lot slower than others, which enables me to do things like this, which I enjoy and helps me, but also tries to help others along the way. And I do feel for the other warriors, as I call them, that are living with this condition, that are a lot further on in their journey, or have had a quicker progressive nature of it, where they're now wheelchair bound and they may not necessarily be able to talk, and they're a lot further on in the journey, which scares me. But if I wasn't surrounded in that community of people living with motor neuron disease, I wouldn't get that insight to what I'm potentially going to expect down the line, a lot slower than others. But I wouldn't get that if I was speaking to a professional, like an occupational therapist that has seen it, that can't then relay the feeling of what they're going to experience. Where I can speak to someone that I can honestly say that I've made friends with. I've not even met them. I've seen them digitally, I suppose, like I'm doing with yourself today. And I can honestly call them friends, because I've been talking to them, sometimes daily, weekly, on FaceTime or just texting, and we're sort of bouncing ideas off the wall with, what's happening with this drug, or what vitamin are you taking that helps you? Have you tried this diet? Because I've noticed that I'm feeling really fatigued. Oh, if you try cutting that out, you might be able to feel a bit better. Or if you have a detox or something like that, loads of little ideas like that, which seems to help. And if you're not the type of person, if you're maybe like an introvert that doesn't like reaching out, and you're coming across those conversations that I'm now putting out on social media and have done for sort of a couple of years now, I'm hoping that those type of people that don't reach out for help and don't ask the questions have that readily available if they search for it online. And I suppose that's nice to know, a nice feeling that I've done something to help someone. And yeah, it's all I can do. It's all I can do.
Well, and it's an enormous gift. It's so generous. It's interesting because I think sometimes we societally feel nervous to share our stories because we think, well, who am I to share this story, right? But when we jump over that feeling and then we are brave enough and generous enough to share our stories, we realize what a gift it is. And it really brings me back to this feeling you must have had. And I have heard this from many ALS patients because there is such a gap between when symptoms begin and when that formal diagnosis is made for many people for a variety of reasons: access, insurance, transportation, fear. There are so many reasons that there can be that delay, and many of them are system related as well, as you experienced. And then also
Yeah,
during lockdown, during COVID related delays. So,
I know.
you know, there are so many reasons that there can be that delay, and people can feel so isolated and alone and frightened. And when someone who is experiencing it themselves is sharing that journey so generously and so openly, it can really have an extraordinary effect. And we were discussing before we started filming today, I think even the smallest things, such as when you did your podcast episode and you were talking about, I believe it was the 5 things, that you had incorporated into your daily routine based on recommendations from your OT and from resources like that you wanted to share because they were having a big impact on your day. And that seems so simple, but if someone
Mm.
hasn't gotten to their OT, PT yet, if someone has, but maybe they weren't having those symptoms 3 months ago at that last appointment, and they're going to wait another month or two for their next appointment, hearing you share information about
Yeah.
something that helps you with eating, drinking, something that helps you with putting on socks, I mean, that can be so empowering, have such a big impact on your day-to-day life.
Yes, I mean, I've had again, going back to the feedback, and it's something that I would then think to myself, what would I want to have as information
Mm.
being newly diagnosed? And it depends on what type of person you are, I suppose. If you're like myself and you want to know, I'm quite impatient, so I want to know what's around the corner. And
Mm.
if I want to do something, I want to do it now. And with motor neuron disease and the way that mine's progressing, I'm in a position where I can pre-plan and get things in place. When I don't get to that point where I need it, I've got it there, if I need it. So having that resource to share and still be able to vocalize that, because it's difficult to understand if I'm going to be able to still do it, and how I will do it,
Mm.
if it affects my voice and when it will affect my voice. So I'm trying to do it all in as sort of a quickest process I can, to get the information out there to help me realize that adaptation that I have got, that I may not necessarily need right now, that I potentially will do down the line. I've justified that by getting it now in readiness of the progression. And there could be someone out there that is in that same position and gone, do you know what?
Mm.
I didn't even think about a wash dry toilet, or a toilet that you don't need to use toilet paper on. I need to get
Yeah.
the process rolling, because the process of getting things like that granted is a long old process. It can take
Yes.
up to 9 to 12 months to get something funded from a local council here in the UK to get
Mm-hmm.
that, if you haven't got the funds yourself to purchase things.
Right. Right.
I've forgotten
And
your
that's
question.
important to share. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. It's important to share your experience with the resources as well. Not only creating resources, But I think one thing, when we talk about government resources, a lot of them are underutilized because people just don't even know about them.
Yeah.
So understanding that they, through you sharing this with people in the UK, understanding those resources are there and to be proactive about them is very helpful.
That's exactly, being proactive is probably, you've hit the nail on the head there, because I've spoken to a handful of people, especially on my Facebook group and other groups that are around on Facebook that do a similar thing. And, I do see many people say the same sort of thing, which is unfortunate, but they don't get the same help and support that maybe I've experienced. And I do have to sometimes ask myself, am I brave enough to ask the question, have you even asked for help? Or are you expecting the help to come to you? And I think sometimes people may be in that mindset of, right, I've been given this disease, I should be given the help that I need and deserve, which definitely we need, and definitely we should be granted it and expect it. But are you being proactive and asking for that help? Because if you don't, that may not necessarily come to you. And it is sometimes all to do with money. And if they're not going to people aren't going to readily go, oh, hi, Mr. Smith, I see you've got motor neuron disease. I'm from the council. I've been told that you need a wash dry toilet that your doctor might recommend in about 5 years' time or 2 years' time. That's not going to happen unless you're proactive about it and make the noise yourself. So I think that's a good point to bring up, because if you don't ask, you sometimes won't get, and don't wait for it to happen.
Right. Pardon me. I think that goes back to too something that whether you have motor neuron disease or some other illness or you don't, we often have such a limiting mindset as to what we can access, what we deserve. And asking for help, asking for assistance can be really challenging.
Yeah.
And it can feel almost disempowering. But I love this message of, no, I want to empower you. I want you to feel empowered every day to be able to do the things you can do because you have these resources. But we need to ask for them because we don't know. Everyone's journey is a little different and their timeline's different, and they won't know where you are. They won't know what to plan for if they don't have this conversation with you. So please ask for help, because our resources limited? Yes. But are there resources that are being underutilized? Also, yes. There are people who really want to help and they're just waiting for a way to provide that help. So be loud, ask for assistance, reach out. Here in the States, the ALS Association does really wonderful work. Even just in your local hospital program, it's not unusual at all to have a closet, we will say, where there are assistive devices where someone used them. They were donated by the family when they no longer needed them. For instance, they just, someone had a stroke, they needed an assistive device, and 3 months later, they didn't need it anymore.
Sure.
And so these closets can be absolutely full of amazing, very lightly or unused equipment that would love to go to a home where it can help the next person. So understanding your resources is really key. And I love that you are doing that. And I imagine your MND and Beyond community is another excellent opportunity to connect people with resources.
Definitely. Yeah. No, it's all about connecting the dots. And if the dots are missing in certain people's journey, then hopefully with me sharing my experience, as different as it may be to others, and like you said, everyone's on a different timeline and a different progression with the disease, they might be in more of a need of a certain adaptation that I've already implemented that they might not necessarily have thought of, and now they know where to get it from, how it works, what it's like, before they've even asked a question to their doctor or occupational therapist to inquire about getting something to help them. I mean, I've got to be honest, the occupational therapists that look after myself, that come to visit, they have a cup of coffee and have a chat. And when I think to myself that I am a few steps ahead of where I am in my progression in terms of getting things future proofed, they're like 10 steps ahead of me. So you listen to your occupational therapists, and if you don't get the answer you want, ask another one and try and find out as much information as you can to help you, because they might have a different perception of what you're portraying in terms of your journey. And people can put a brave face on. And I think if you can be as honest as you can with the professionals that are going to be looking after you, they would be able to implement things that can help you adapt to the new way of life.
Yes, absolutely. Be honest about the challenges, because that's what we're there for, is to help. Exactly. I want to talk about your experience with research studies, because I know from previous conversations you've had and your podcast that when you were diagnosed, you were very eager to participate in research studies, but it wasn't as simple as it was first portrayed to you. Tell me about that part of your journey.
So I remember the day on my diagnosis, I said the words, "Use me like a pincushion." And I meant that in a way of just inject me with anything, because I'm keen to slow this down and find a cure. And it's taken me up until about sort of 2 years into the journey to realize that we are still so behind on finding treatment or a cure, which then added to the frustration of finding anything to help, because it took me at least 2 years to actually get onto any sort of trial. And when I was diagnosed, he said the professor said, "You're a great advocate for trials, for drug trials." Explained about one of them that was fairly close to me. And when I got back to my hometown in Bournemouth, in the south of the UK, obviously spoke to my neurologist that I was now being looked after, and mentioned about this trial. They advised me how to apply for it, and it turned out that I was, I think, about 10 miles outside of the area that they were covering. So I suppose you call them zip codes, but we call them postcodes in the UK. So I was in one postcode, and I was just one short of being able to be on the current SMART trial. But hats off to my neurologist. He has spoken, he managed to get that trial to be expanded and be brought down to the hospital that I'm looked after. And I managed to get on my first drug trial, which were for, at the time, it was for 2 drugs, 1 placebo. And they asked if I wanted to wait just a little bit longer because they were going to add a 3rd drug onto it. And I'm trying to remember what they were. I'm still waiting to know what I was actually on in terms of the trial, but I managed to get on this trial, went through a huge process of getting applying for it and going through blood tests and things like that. I had to do cognitive tests and point to a picture of a tractor and point to a picture of a cat and say random words like over and over again. It was quite surreal, like almost back to school. And unfortunately, I don't think I was on the trial for longer than about 2 months. And one of the 3 drugs that were on the trial had been, two of the 3 drugs, that were on the trial had been taken off because they weren't showing the results they were showing when they were testing them on, I think they were rats or mice. I can't quite remember. So after 2 years, after being told I was an advocate for the drug trial, to then 2 years later to only be able to go on the one and only trial that I was in the area for, I was on it for about 8 or 9 weeks. And I'm still yet to find out what the actual drug was. And I'm no longer on any sort of treatment. They offered me, when I was diagnosed, a drug called Riluzole. I did start taking that as soon as I was diagnosed, but very quickly experienced some unfortunate side effects that were quite rare. I've been told that you don't normally get that many side effects with it, but it was making me feel very fatigued, very tired. it made me, because I was still working at the time being a barber, I noticed straight away that my weakness was almost speeding up. And it sounds really odd, but that's how I felt with it. And it made my fasciculations more. And I had to say to the doctor and say, look, I'm not feeling this drug. It's not making
Yeah.
me feel great at all.
Yeah.
And he said, look, I think based on your progression, I think it probably is wise to come off it and
Yeah.
have a better experience of life without having this drug, impeding you in things where you can't then do. So yeah, I'm currently on no drugs at all, but the process of finding a drug trial, because I'm open and happy to go on anything, if it would help.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been very frustrating, and there's been nothing else available that I've come across and or have been offered to me, not without
Yeah.
trying and asking.
Well, I appreciate you sharing your experience because I think a lot of people have a similar experience. They really want to be a part of trials, but
Yeah,
then they recognize that as much as trials also want patients, there are such stringent requirements, location, onset, as I think you've discussed in other interviews, they really want maybe to have you really early in the onset, but it's
yeah,
really no fault of the patients that it takes, 1 or 2 years, unless you have a specific genetic mutation, then you don't even necessarily have a clear-cut diagnosis until things have progressed, until you've had 1 or 2 EMGs and
yeah.
several exams. And that's because we don't necessarily have a diagnosis that we say,
Mm,
okay, you have motor neuron disease from the start. We don't have that at this time. So it's really challenging and disheartening, but you are doing incredible work that is so impactful, and you're still making yourself available. And I think that's important. I also want to highlight your experience with the medication because I think it's really important to understand what the actual benefits of these medications are, prolonging survival on average 2 months. And if you've got a disease course of 18 months, 36 months, that can make a really big difference,
yeah,
right? But if you have a longer disease course as you're experiencing, and it's giving you so many side effects and making every day such that you're not having the same quality of life, it's okay to say no.
yeah,
That's okay. And I think that's
yeah.
a really important thing for people to understand too, because they may feel pressure from their loved ones also. Well, if this gives you an extra 2 months, I want you to be here. But if it's making you feel miserable every day, it's your life and you want to feel as good as you
Exactly.
can. Yeah.
Yeah, and as soon as I stopped taking it, I think once it was out of my system, sort of a couple of weeks later, I felt like I did before I was diagnosed. It was an odd feeling. So it was definitely, and my body wasn't reacting to that particular drug very well, which obviously
Yeah.
then made me even more hungry to find something else that could help me. And I went down a big rabbit hole of going
Mm,
through the likes of Google to find vitamins and supplements, and I was spending huge amounts of money on
mm,
vitamins and things like that to homeopathically, I think is the right terminology, to try and help with motor neuron disease. And some worked, some didn't. I'm going off on a tangent a little bit, but if I have done a post about this, and I think I did mention it in a podcast or a YouTube video. Um, Out of all the vitamins that I did go through, the two that were probably the most apparent that helped me, and again, people are different, people will have different reactions and different experiences. Magnesium, for some reason, seemed
mm,
to help me massively with the fasciculations. They decreased ever so slightly. And if I
mhm,
felt a bit tired, or if my kids had me up through the night because they're teething or whatever, um, vitamin B12 also helped me and gave me a bit like I've just had a triple espresso. It was like it was weird. So there's loads of things that I looked into, and I sort of now looking back at it, probably didn't need to, but it's only natural that you're going to try and think,
yeah.
well, I've now stopped the one and only medication that is made for ALS, I'm now not taking it. What else can I take to try and help and slow down this progression? And it just, my whole life was involved with it. I spent hours just researching, Googling this, Googling that. And I think
Yeah.
if I could go back in time and tell myself something, it probably would be just chill out a little bit.
Mm.
Just go with the flow, because you're spending almost hundreds of pounds, sometimes monthly on high quality vitamins and things like that, and most of them didn't work. But it's a learning curve. I'm learning to adapt and live life with trying different things, and if they do work, carry on with them. If they don't, I don't. And I try and live by like a motto, I suppose, is I focus on things that I can do, not what I can't. And if it's out of my control, I don't bother doing it.
I really appreciate you sharing that experience. And one thing you made me think about as you're sharing that is, when we have such a big life change and a new diagnosis, I mean, we have to give ourselves grace. There's going to be coping with that. We're going to go along that journey as well. I think it's important to remember that you're an entire human being. You're not someone with ALS or MND. You're an entire human being. And when you take magnesium, I mean, many people are magnesium deficient,
Yeah,
right? Many people are B12 deficient. Many people are dehydrated. Many people are sleep deprived. Many people are anxious and focusing maybe backward rather than forward. And all of those things is going to have a negative effect on your day perception of your life, on how you're feeling, right? And so even if taking magnesium didn't specifically interact with your motor neurons and improve how they react, how they respond, it made you feel better.
sure,
And
it was.
and
Yeah,
that's good enough, right? That's great. And so I love actually just kind of taking a step back and saying, well, that made you feel better. It's not dangerous. It's a common thing that people do that makes them feel better. So,
yeah,
again, like, as long as you're having good discussions with your doctor, with the person who's taking care of you, just to make sure that you aren't harming yourself, with something that you found online, because that can happen too, especially with some supplements. They're not
yeah, definitely.
necessarily regulated. And so
Yeah,
they can have things in them that aren't on the labels that can be hurting you, like, mercury levels, for example. There
yeah,
can be issues with some supplements having things in them that you don't know are in them. Or maybe
exactly.
they say they have 100% of this, but they have 2% of that, and no one's really testing it
Yeah,
in a consistent way to tell you. So as you said, you're spending hundreds of pounds, and is it helping? Is it not? And you
no.
don't really know.
And I think just to add, what I found beneficial stopping taking
Mm,
all those vitamins was it sort of calibrated my mindset in,
mm,
it doesn't matter that I didn't take a vitamin, or I've run out of a certain vitamin. It's not gonna, I'm out of sync, or whatever. It sort of added to it the anxiety of the whole situation by having to remember to take the amount of vitamins that I was. I got to the point where I was having the Monday to Sunday little pot where I was putting them all in, and it was sort of taking over my life, where I was like, no,
mm,
I need to go and take my 20 odd tablets now, because that's what I need to do to help me with, because the Wikipedia information that I saw online said that this can help. That particular person said it did. It must help me then. And I think as soon as I said to myself, do you know what? This is becoming financially hard to carry on spending all that money on something that I didn't know was actually going to help. Although
mm,
I reaped some of the benefits from one or two of them, I'm going to
mm,
start whittling down and taking away each one until I find the one that works for me the best. And then when I got to that point, I realized that there was only really two that I
mm,
found beneficial for me. And like you said, potentially because I was deprived from that anyway, I was low in B12 and low in magnesium. But what I also found out very quickly that it de-stressed me and actually made me less anxious about remembering to take all of those vitamins,
Yeah.
and then in turn helped my symptoms with MND and took away that stress and anxiety of remembering that I need to take all of them. Plus, it saved me a load of money as well. So I just sort of, as I found out that it works best for me. Sorry, I'll rephrase that. As I found that the two vitamins that work best for me, it may not necessarily work for others. I now only just take them as and when I feel the need to. If I've had a splurge on a diet, I've had a bit of I've not eaten very healthily at the weekend or something, which again is fine. Live life. And I then feel a bit sluggish the next day. I might have a B12 and then it makes me feel better. Whether it's doing it physically, I don't know. Is it mentally? Quite possibly. So whatever works, I think, is the best analogy for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are other things that you have spoken about that you have incorporated into not necessarily your daily routine, but into your routine that you feel have been beneficial for you. One of those things that you discussed was massage. Can you share your
Yes,
experience with that?
I love the massages. They're so nice. It was something that was offered to me through. Now we have. I'll try and paint the picture a bit better. So we've got the Motor Neuron Disease Association, which is a bit like the ALS association or foundation, whatever the name of it
Right.
is in the
Yeah.
US. Um, they have different branches, local branches across the UK that the charity will help fund certain services. Some have cleaners, um, some people I think even have their nails painted if they want, and things like that. And in my particular branch, they offer massages. And once a month, I get a massage from someone that works for the charity. They give me a massage. But what I also get, which is something that's very specific to the hospital that I am being looked after, and it's called a Macmillan unit, which they look after a broad range of people, predominantly cancer. Macmillan is a large charity, so it's a cancer research charity, I think, and my hospital is a Macmillan unit where there's respite, there's physiotherapy, things like that for everyone that has fallen under the category that they look after. And motor neuron disease was pigeonholed into that category because there wasn't really any other resource or sort of medical care for people with motor neuron disease. So they've sort of given that onus to people that also have cancer. And part of that Macmillan unit is that I get, as well as like a sports massage from the charity, I also get I call it the nice massage, where she comes into my house and burns incense sticks and puts music on and does all the nice massages that make you fall asleep and relaxes you. But I find it so beneficial, and I look forward to it every single month because I definitely notice where my muscles are getting weaker and the atrophy is sort of kicking in. I get a tremendous amount of pain in sort of my shoulder and sort of back area where my other muscles are compensating for the muscles that are no longer working, and they definitely help me anyway. And I'm very lucky and grateful that I can utilize that type of service. And again, going back to what we said earlier, it's a type of service that if you don't investigate and ask if it's available, you won't necessarily get it. They won't go, here you go, here's a massage once a month. You'll hear it from conversations in the likes of my Facebook group or other groups, forums. And if you are lucky, your occupational therapist, like they did for me, will tell me, get on the phone to the Motor Neuron Disease Association. Your particular branch offers this type of service. I think it will benefit you. And 2 years later, 3 years later, still getting them. And I feel very lucky to be able to have them.
I love that. And, I think it's really interesting. I really enjoyed hearing you speak about this on your reel, I think is when you first brought it up, which please go and watch James Reels. He's doing one every day, the month of June 2024 for Global MND Awareness Month. And the MND Awareness Day is June 21st, which is when we're going to be airing this episode. And so this month, every day, there have been really inspiring, informative clips that you've been putting out. And I believe one of them was about the massage and how beneficial that has been for you. And I love that. And I appreciate how you mention pain, because when you go in to see your neurologist, your OTPT, you may be told from the onset of the disease that this is not a painful disease. And so then you might have some dissonance when you're like, well, I'm having pain, and it may not be pain because of the actual muscle atrophy, but like you said, well, now I've got this other muscle that's overcompensating, or I
Yeah,
have a joint that is used to having support from all of these different muscles, and now it's not getting the support it needs. So now that joint that maybe had to some disease before that I didn't notice, now I'm starting to feel that because the
exactly.
bone's rubbing in
Yeah,
a new way. So it's important to listen to your body and not kind of shame yourself like, oh, well, I heard this isn't a painful disease, so I'm just going to ignore that. No, speak up about what you're feeling, because most likely someone else has experienced that. And once we know that that is something you're experiencing, we can help. If we
yeah,
don't know, we can't help.
yeah, yeah. I was
So,
almost, the pain was quite, I've had it in my left first, and that has now gone.
mm,
And I think that's, excuse me, I think the pain in my left has gone primarily, potentially, because of atrophy. There's no longer the
mm,
muscle there to cause the pain.
mm-hmm,
Um, but I did go through a stage of listening to the physiotherapist that is within the hospital that I've looked after, and she showed me some stretches to do, and incorporating the massages, I think, helped relieve that pain. I now
mm-hmm,
unfortunately have it in my right arm, which feels even more painful than my left, and I
mm,
think only time will help with the pain because of the natural progression of MND, unfortunately. But um, yeah, they don't half get some knots out of that area. So there's definitely something happening in that area. So it definitely relieves it, and I would recommend anything like a massage to anyone, even if it's just to feel de-stressed.
yeah.
It's amazing what feeling relaxed can do to your MND symptoms. And when you're feeling relaxed, everything feels less intense, which is a nice feeling.
Absolutely. Now, it's wonderful having these tools that help you every day. I'm recalling when you talk about progression, something that you've mentioned before, that when you were formally diagnosed, and here you are, under the age of 40, and you have this new diagnosis of MND, and the doctor asks you if you have a bucket list and
Yeah,
suggests that if you do, to go after achieving those things, and if you don't, to create one.
yeah.
Tell me what you've been doing toward that end as you think about not knowing the exact future of how it will progress. What are the things that you decided you really wanted to achieve and to do for yourself?
I had a relatively short bucket list because I feel that I've achieved quite a lot in my time
Mm,
uh, in terms of finding the love of my life and marrying her, having three beautiful children, and buying a house, finding the job that I loved. So a lot of ticks had been done, which may
right.
not be important to others, but it was for me. But there were two that were unticked, and one of them is I've been badgering my wife for years after she bought me for my 30th birthday, so nearly 10 years ago. Um, it was an indoor skydiving experience. Have you seen them before? So there's a
Yes,
big
yeah.
fan, and you're basically in a tube, and you can imitate skydiving. And from that point, I was like, I want to do a real one. I want to do a real one.
Mm,
So as part of one of my bucket list items were to do a real skydive, and my wife and her sister, our brother-in-law, and my mother-in-law and father-in-law all went in together and bought me a skydiving experience where I jumped at the highest point that you can do here in the UK, which I think is 15,000 feet.
Wow.
And it was the best experience ever. And as soon as I landed, I wanted to do it again,
Mhm.
and I would happily do another one. And I might even look at trying to do one if I'm able to for fundraising. So yeah, watch this.
Yeah, please. If you have a website and if you have a link for that fundraiser, please tell us and we'll put it in the show notes. And
Yeah,
yeah,
I've
please,
not set
anybody
it
who's
up yet.
listening.
I've not set it up yet, but I will be. I will be. So follow me on Instagram or
Yeah.
YouTube and whatever, and I'll probably announce it if I'm able to do it. But that was the main one of my things ticked off. The other one was actually a surprise from my school friends that we're still in touch with together.
Mm.
Not as often as we would like to be, because we've all got family and we've all got commitments now, but we're in our own little WhatsApp group. I've known them since um, I call it senior school, you call it high school. So I was,
Mhm.
I've known some of them since I was sort of 13, 14 years old, and I'm 40 this year. I've known one of the guys since I was born,
Wow.
and they randomly turned up to my house one morning after my wife had told me, you need to book the next 3 days off from work. I was like, okay, why? And she was like, don't worry about it. And I was thinking, oh, maybe she's booked like a romantic spa away somewhere, like kid free or something. And I was like, oh, it sounds nice. That'd be lovely. Nice little lay in. And then my friends turned up in a minibus, and they drove me to a secret location that I didn't know where we were going. And we drove for about 4.5 hours, maybe longer. And we ended up in a place in the UK. Well, it's not technically in the UK, but it's in Wales. Do you know where Wales is?
Yes.
You do? And I got very, very drunk, and we stayed in this awesome Airbnb, which was an old mill house where they've got the big wooden wheel on the side where the river makes it go round, and it must have been like an old bread making factory or something like that. But it had
Mm.
been turned into this real cute sort of Airbnb with like a thatched roof, uh, typical English countryside cottage in the middle of nowhere, and had an open fire, things like that. And then they said, "Oh," I
Mm.
said, "Oh, this is really awesome. Oh, this is. I haven't had a lad's holiday forever." And they were like, "Oh,
Mm.
what are we going to do tomorrow?" And he said, "Well, don't drink too much. We're going to climb Mount Snowdon, which is one of the highest mountains in the UK or in Wales, in a place called Snowdonia, which is like a national park." And
Wow.
today we climbed that and went to the top of the mountain and come back down again, drunk some more. And then the next day we did the largest zip line, I think, in Europe. And I was basically Superman and went down a zip line, and it was like I don't know how many meters it is.
Wow.
It took a good 2-3 minutes to go down it. So that was an unintentional tick off the bucket list, and probably two of those were ticked off. Climbing a mountain that I've never done before, and
Wow.
B, doing the largest zip line in Europe. So I haven't really had any more that I felt the need to try and tick off.
Mm.
But I would say that having a terminal illness has changed the way that my mindset is. And if I do come across something I want to tick off, I will do my best to try and do it rather than putting it off.
Mm. That's beautiful advice. And I just so appreciate how generous you are with your story and with sharing your beautiful family. If you follow James on Instagram and watch his reels, you get to see his lovely little family. And, I think it's important to say that as you are doing all of this advocacy, speaking for Parliament, trying to participate in research when you can, spreading the word, creating this wonderful Facebook group, MND and Beyond, creating your podcast episodes, Diagnosed Dad. While you're doing all of that, you're also a stay-at-home dad to 3 energetic, beautiful young people. And that's more than one full-time job in and of itself, just that one title. And so I just want to thank you so much for you taking the time to come on my podcast to share your story, and for just being so generous with your time, which, as we know, is our most precious resource. And that's why we come on shows like this and talk about important causes like MND, because we want to cure it. We want to slow down the disease because we want to give that precious gift of time with your loved ones to you and to others with this disease. So I just so appreciate you, and I can't wait to continue to watch your journey and to just see how many lives you impact so greatly through the work you're doing.
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate you taking the time yourself to have me on your podcast. It's been really enjoyable.
Oh, it has been such a pleasure to learn more about you and your story. And like I said, I will keep watching, and I'm sure my listeners will too. Now, tell us how people can follow you and how they can donate to ALS MND research if they want to. Let's share some resources here on air as well as in our show notes so that people can reach out to you and help in any way they can.
Sure. So I fall under the handle of Diagnosed Dad on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. I share my journey predominantly on there with snippets of my life. And if you want to look at longer versions of my life living with this condition, and I do that over on YouTube where it allows longer videos. I will be starting after this month doing the post every day for the awareness month. I'm looking to start a sort of a daily, not a daily, but a vlog type sort of thing. So giving insights on, what it's like to do things like just get your hair cut or go to the shops and things like that. Just little insights to show what my life is now like living with motor neuron disease, to do just the day-to-day tasks that most people would take for granted. And then if you're more of a listener, I've got my podcast, which I will normally just do audio only from the YouTube videos going forward. And that is under Diagnosed Dad as well. And that's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, predominantly. And then if you are living or dealing with motor neuron disease, ALS yourself, I've got my Facebook group, which is MND and Beyond, and it's open to everyone. It's based in the UK. We've got a mixed array of people from America, Australia, Canada. I think some people from India, I think, as well. And we're all a happy bunch in there, or as happy as we can be. So feel free to come and join the group too, and you'll get some insights to other people's experiences as well.
James Smith, everyone, you are such a light. I so appreciate having shared this time with you, and I'm so glad to have made this connection. And thank you again to our listeners for being here for this really, really important discussion. Please reach out to James if you want to be a part of his group. Learn more about living with MND and ALS through his amazing reels, his short form content, as well as his podcast, Diagnosed Dad. And follow along here at Talks with Dr. Shafer for more inspiring episodes. Take care, stay safe, and I'll talk to you soon.